back to another episode of Sorry for Rambling. I'm Alex Kack, and today I'm joined by Alie Ward. Alie, how are you holding up?
I'm holding up okay, actually. You know what's funny is it really changes hour to hour. I'll have a really good coffee in the morning, and then I'll be like, today's going to be a good day. And then by the afternoon, I'll unravel. So it's really, you never know. That's what's fun.
Yeah, I mean, those are the times we live in, right?
Yeah.
I hit these constant like highs and lows throughout the day where I'm like, I've never been so productive in my whole life. And then I'm like, I didn't do anything but just do all the extra dishes I've accumulated for no particular reason. Like
That's something. That's something. Are you kidding?
Is
That's
it?
what most people do in a whole day. I crept into my laundry pile that's like pre-COVID. Like it got down to mismatched socks for weeks. I was down to underwear I did not want to put on my body. I was like, that's not comfortable. So I finally, I was like a step away from swimsuit bottoms and I was like, laundry's going in. So I don't know. I really definitely thought that I was going to get some major things off my bucket list during this time. And I have taken more naps than I do like in an entire year. So, we're rolling with it.
Yeah, I mean, we're taking it as it comes. I put on all the weight I lost last year. So
No.
I'm counting that as an accomplishment.
Did you lose it from a parasite? Because that would be an accomplishment.
No, I think I was less depressed than I had been for the 3 years prior.
I get it.
Right?
I get it. I know. I'm trying to cut my carb consumption because my boyfriend and I were in a very heavy bread phase for a couple minutes there. And he's gluten intolerant and he was just destroying himself. It's just like, he'd just be eating these fistfuls of sourdough and he'd be like, I don't feel good. Like, grab me more butter. And so it was, we get it. I get it. I make kombucha Ritas sometimes, which is like a tequila kombucha. Top notch. Very refreshing. Go. Probiotic,
Yeah. There's multiple types of fermentation in a glass. So
I know little lime in there. It's pretty good.
Yeah, that's a like consumable science experiment.
Thank you. I think so. Yes.
Which brings me to something I want to talk about, which is that so you've had a whole career, and you're like a polyhyphenate, it seems like. But the one common thread through all of that is that you do seem to do a lot of kind of almost educational reference-based content and material. How did that start? What made you decide that was like the niche that you were going to pursue?
You know what? I wanted to do something like this, since high school, is I was really into science as a kid. Like I lived, we had a barbed wire fence, which was extremely a very big tetanus risk. And we would just crawl through the barbed wire fence into this pasture before this place was developed where I grew up near Sacramento. And we would just poke cow patties and we'd go try and look at pollywogs and look at birds and dig stuff up and get muddy. And so I always really liked that aspect of unpaid field work as a small child scientist. We'd poke. One of our favorite games, my sisters and I, we'd go out to the pasture. One of us would have a pen, one of us would have a clipboard, and one of us would have a stick. And the person with the stick would poke the cow patty, and then we would decide as a committee how old we thought it was. And then we'd write it down on the clipboard, and then we'd go to the next one. I don't know what we were trying to, I tried to harvest algae out of a pond because I thought I could weave cloth with it. I was like, I figured out what we can do with this disgusting stuff. So I always really liked that, but I really liked art and writing and making little movies and stuff. So I was like, am I going to go into the arts or am I going to go into the sciences? So I kept wavering back and forth where I'd be like, no, I'm a science kid. And I'd be like, but I really like plays and stuff. So now I'm an arts kid. And so I finally just figured out a way in adulthood to mishmash, so I'm not very good at either, but then I occupy my own cozy little Venn diagram thing.
You found a lane.
I found a lane and I picked it, man. And
that's the most difficult thing. Cause I feel like I've always had the same kind of struggle, whereas I was really into history and politics, but at the same time, I was this flamboyant, over the top ADHD addled person, which means that I'm not competent to do anything professionally. So I wound up doing stand up
That's the perfect job though for you, because like what you have to do is deliver engaging thoughts and rambles to people about relevant topics. It's just, you found the thing you were good at. There you go.
It is, until you're like standing on a bar stage and you have some like drunk frat boy who probably shouldn't have been like let in, stand up and like in response to your like great Tiananmen Square punchline you're working on, like stand up and just like yell for the entire audience like, what the fuck is Tin Man Square?
Oh, no.
You're just like, oh shit, that guy's here on a scholarship.
Oh no. What state was this, by the way?
Oh, that's Arizona. That's where this is where I live still.
I think there's your problem. I think if we just opened the hood of that, we just found the squirrel's nest in your motor.
It's like, you know, I'll defend my home state on this, because we have we have a lot of universities here for some reason. They're actually, two of them are pretty good, and like one of them's kind of trash, and I'll let the listeners figure out which ones I'm talking about. The thing that blows me away about it is that, you know, because I live in Tucson, which is like it's a big city, but the college takes up a lot of the real estate here, and so when you interact with these kids, they met some of like the smartest, most creative, like passionate, like hardworking kids, and like they're the townies that are like taking night school at the university. We are just like inundated though with like the most like spoiled, like shitty, awful like kids from like each coast who like didn't get into a better school. So it's like,
yeah, those kids that got like BMWs when they turned 16, and probably didn't like the color of it. Those kids.
Yeah, like keyed their own birthday car because it was silver instead of powder blue.
I went to high school with some kids like that. I remember there was one girl in my graduating class, because our family, I grew up in the Bay Area, but our family lived in a really nice school district, but we rented houses within it. So we'd move like every year or so when the people's house we were in like wanted to sell it, and then we'd move to another house to stay in the district and skirt property taxes. But there's one girl, I think her name was Rosalind, and she got a Porsche for her 16th birthday, and she didn't want it. And so instead she begged her parents instead, please, can I trade it in for an Isuzu Amigo? Which she did. Do you remember what Isuzu Amigos were?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
How?
They were,
what? Why?
She really wanted an Amigo. She wanted a turquoise Amigo with pink lettering on it instead of the maroon Porsche that she got. So I remember these were like troubles in my high school. So I was very goth. I was just like black lipstick, black hair, like hair and a bunch of octopus braids, like, because I was just like, no one expects you to wear Benetton when you're like a weird cyber goth that only dresses in, you know, like Goodwill stuff. So that's how I got around it. I was like, you want to judge me? Go have at it. I'll give you something else.
Yeah, I'll give you a reason to pass scorn on me.
Yeah, exactly.
So
God. It was so easy. It was so easy. I remember how many people were like, hey, are you going to go see The Nightmare Before Christmas? And I'd be like, I already did opening night. It was like they thought they were being so brutal. And I was like, you just get my branding. But yeah. And now I live in LA, which is, you know, pretty much like Arizona.
I mean, like, we're the worst parts of like LA County though. I mean, not Tucson. Tucson's its own weird, like, bizarre. I don't know if you've ever been here, but it's like, I
have, yeah. I think it smells wonderful out there. You guys have haboobs. You have big old haboobs. You have those big storm dust clouds, and then when it rains, you have the smell of petrichor. That smell of like the desert oils and dust, and like I think Arizona for that is very cool. And my grandparents used to live in Yuma, and they would cross the border to get all their health care.
That is a Southwest miracle right there.
Yep.
It truly is.
It was. My grandfather had south of the border choppers, as he called them.
That's why we have so many Republicans here. You don't need Medicare for all when you can just drive 4 hours to get everything taken care of, right?
Oh, that's such a mixed poisonous mindset to take advantage of that, and then of course close them on the other side. I understand why it is a great place to be in if you have like political leanings at all, because you could definitely choose a side and you're needed there.
Yeah, it's a weird place. What we need more science content here.
Oh.
Can you target ads for the things you make specifically to like, not to Tucson, but like to the Phoenix metro area?
Yeah, exactly.
It would help us out a lot.
I was talking to, sometimes I'll get in these discussions with other people who are scientists who are in the media and science communicators. And they, discussions are a lot about how can you get people to believe things if they don't believe scientists, they don't trust scientists. And a lot of it is very echo chambery of like screaming to people on science Twitter about climate change. And you're like, the people that you need to get are the people who are not going to follow you. And so, like with my podcast, I try to retain those folks who might not trust scientists or who might have political leanings that are not aligned to my own, and just try to have good things seep in their brain instead of screaming, because the more you scream at someone that they're wrong, the more that they're just going to dig their heels in. So I try to just like influence, gently massage their brains with facts. See if it works.
Just gently kneading in reality.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Speaking of that like vein though, because here's what you remind me, your 2020s Bill Nye. Like that's kind of.
Why, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what you are. I mean, the content might not be like so like child focused, but like I think you're definitely in that vein and tradition. Would be my assessment.
Thank you.
I hope that's a compliment, not an insult.
No, it is. What's funny is he has a podcast, and I went on his podcast, and I was telling this story on another friend's podcast, but they asked me to be his first guest on his podcast, and I was like, surely you have addressed this to the wrong recipient, like not me. Like, no, what? And so they had me on his first episode, and we talked all about like, what do you do when someone says there's a flat earth or they are a climate denier? Like, don't you want to get so mad at them? And I was like, I get it, Bill, but the thing is like, you have to come at it with some kind of empathy of, okay, why are people in such denial? Like, what is that? Is that fear-based? And if it is, like, what are they afraid of? And how can you kind of approach it that way? Just because, there are reasons why some people don't want to believe certain things. So yeah, I talked specifically with Bill Nye about that, because Bill Nye is very like, what's wrong with you losers? You're burning the planet up. Like, he's had it to the point where he's like, I've fucking had it. I'm going to tell it like it is, which is super appreciated. But of course, then,
you preach to the choir.
Yeah, you end up in a little bit of an echo chamber. So yeah, the thing about like what I love about science so much is that it's everything. It's just everything that there has some scientific basis, whether it's like getting drunk or putting together furniture or whatever you're doing, like who you're in love with. That's all like, who knows what part of my body was at one point a frog. I don't know, like a chicken could have eaten a frog. I eat the chicken, I'm part frog. That's nuts, like it's just, or water that was once in a toad is I drank. So it's all just kind of mystical and weird, and I love it. So trying to get people away from the idea that you're a science person or you're not, just by making them understand that there's like curious, weird stuff going on all the time. And it's usually weirder than science fiction, and it's hotter gossip than Bravo, and just trying to gossip about that stuff,
It's a very like almost pantheistic like view to it that you just took, which it's very Carl Sagan, right? That was kind of his thing, is like the marriage of like kind of like pantheistic faith and science, and he communicated that very well. And to me, like that almost seems like that's been a missing component of how we communicate with people in regards to, because obviously one of the lines that's drawn in the sand is faith, right?
Right.
People refuse to accept fact because it goes against a faith that they hold or they've converted to or whatever. is there a role for people in the field communicating science to influence faith in that way, or to do we need to simply just update what we look at in the kind of supernatural spiritual realm to be able to process and understand like reality? Like, is there, how do you approach those types of subjects and conversations?
You know, I think it's funny because I think that when I'm always a little bit boggled by folks who take like scripture super literally and not as like an allegory, you know, because I'm sure there's some great lessons in there. There's a lot of pretty toxic ones too, but you know, I think trying to get people to maybe see that we use story across many cultures to explain phenomena that we don't understand, and we've been doing that like since rain and since fire and since you know, disease. Like, we've been using narrative to describe things that we don't know the science for. So I think trying to get people to maybe get a little bit removed from the literal nature of things and understand that that was their ancestors like striving for knowledge and explanation, and in the absence of that, you know, using creativity. So now that we have certain aspects of knowledge, like, you can kind of abandon that as an allegory. But I mean, I think like there's so much science that we don't know, and I think it's really funny how when you're in the science world, you understand how scientists don't know shit, and they know they don't know shit. But when you're outside of it, you're like, scientists think they goddamn know everything, telling me how the world works. You're like, oh no, these scientists are over there with data being like, what the fuck? How many dicks do frogs even have? Like, no one knows anything, you know? And like microscopes haven't been around that long. And like, you know, flatworms have a totally different mitochondrial DNA than most other animals on the planet. I was just talking to a flatworm expert, and I was like, why is that? Are they aliens? He's like, we don't know. We don't know anything. So I think trying to get people to understand how exciting it is that we're still discovering a lot of stuff, really basic, fundamental stuff, and looking at things as stories more than like, you know, exact recipes of how to live. But it really, I don't know. I mean, it fucks me up all the time that politically the people who are the most conservative are like the least Christ-like. I just don't, a lot of times, you know, the people who are the most outspoken conservatively sometimes use that as like a human shield for some of their viewpoints, which I think sucks. But yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes it helps to just think that you're just a bunch of recycled molecules, because then you're like, well, I mean, I'm gonna die, but I'm gonna be something else. I just really like the idea of being a frog. Just like the idea, like, I hope when I die, someone's like, okay, she really wanted to be a frog, so we're feeding her body to a bunch of frogs. You're like, I'm 400 frogs now. This rules.
You know, that kind of strikes to me when you're talking about being recycled molecules, and I think this is something that you've hit on a few times, which is the way that science can actually bring everything together. And I think one of the issues, though, is how we often teach and discuss science to the public, and especially in their formative years, oftentimes does the opposite. It tends to make people feel very small and very alone.
That's a good point.
Which can be terrifying to a student or to a grown adult who, you know, we're very social creatures. And some of these other things, politics, faith, they do the opposite, right? They bring people together around central issues. They might, you know, split us into categories of it and make us kill and, you know, destroy each other. But they bring together people to do that, right?
Yeah.
I appreciate what you do and the way you talk about science, specifically for the reason that like you've hit on several times here, which is you explain that there is actually there are common threads that don't just unite all humanity, but they unite kind of everything in the universe to some extent.
Yeah.
Is that something intentional you do, or is that just a kind of subconscious view you hold and explain?
That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. I think, you know, I think it's something that I started getting really excited about with science when I was learning it. Like in high school, I was always you know, always taking science classes. This was an AP Science. And I remember when you take AP Science, there's a test at the end of the year. And, you know, if you pass it, then you can get some credits for college so that you can take like fewer classes there. And so I had this but you had to buy this book that was like 4 inches thick. I think I still have it. It's like probably behind me. Oh, I do. Oh my God. I'm going to show you via Zoom. This was my biological science book. And it's a few inches thick. I got this when I was probably 16, junior, senior in high school. And we had a shit ton of homework to read. And you bought the book. So it was like the first book that I had that I had to buy. It was like $150 and I didn't have to return it at the end of the year. And I remember just being really fascinated with biology. Like from a molecular level, how much of our bodies we slough off and renew, and how we process things for energy and convert them all the time. And it's just essentially like ecosystems were really interesting to me. And so I think it became kind of magical to think about yourself not in this one really finite life, but almost what were you before and what are you going to be next. And, I don't know if you've ever done 23andMe or whatever, but, this notion that they could be okay, here are some weird cousins that you never knew and they live in Kentucky and you're probably never going to meet them. But this idea that what were you before? And ultimately life on planet Earth came from, and everything that makes up life and what we're seeing just came from stars, which is crazy. Just a star exploded and then all of these things converged to make my stupid ass, that's nuts. And so I think when you break it down into those little levels, life seems much more serendipitous than fated. And so it becomes a little bit more exciting because then, okay, well, the choices you make matters. And this is all just a really kind of random situation that turned out, pretty bizarrely. It gets kind of exciting. If that makes sense.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. I'm curious, what are the big unanswered questions that really excite you, or that you really kind of geek out on, or that on the opposite end that really terrify you?
Oh, I think that's the same thing. It's the same thing about mortality. I was just writing the planaria episode. Again, it's about flatworms. And flatworms, these planaria, number one, they look like tiny, tiny dicks. They're just these little flesh-colored, a few centimeters, and they look like if you put a dick under a rolling pan and miniaturized it. And they have these 2 eye spots, some of them that are cross-eyed. So they just look like these really goofy, cross-eyed, googly-eyed dicks. And when they get cut, they can regenerate themselves. So let's say it gets cut in 2, each one becomes a full planarian, and it takes 3 weeks. To the point where it can get cut in 280 sections, and each of those will become its own planaria with identical DNA. And it's just the idea of what inhabits those, and how identical twins can have different personalities. What is that secret sauce that makes you alive 1 second and dead the next, and makes cloned planarians, one is more afraid of light than the other. What is that? And so, where do we actually go? What happens to consciousness? And are we going to be able to understand consciousness in a way that in the future, that how we understand viruses and bacteria now? They used to think that there was just fucking ghost germs that would, give you a fever. And they're like, oh, we must have a crazy ghost in here. And you're like, oh my God, they didn't know. And I always think of this one story of, there was a really weird kind of dicey medical doctor, a few hundred years ago, 150 years ago, whatever. And everyone was like, oh, he's kind of sketchy. And he would do this really weird ritual before tending to women giving birth, before getting up in their privates. He would do this weird ritual with his hands. And, but the women kept going to him because there were a lot fewer maternal mortalities with him in his childbirthing ward. And everyone's like, that dude's fucking weird. I don't know what he's doing. And what he was doing with his hands was just washing them he was just washing his hands. So he didn't put his like blood and pus covered mitts up someone's torn vagina. And so everyone's like, I don't know, man, he's got some superstition, he's some new agey dude. And they're like, no, he's just not infecting people. And so there's so much we don't know. And so there's so much about, like, who knows if prayer or if creative visualization or something like The Secret or a silent hex, like, who knows if we're actually doing some kind of weird transmitting of energy to affect something. We don't know. Do I think it's controllable? Not really, but it's interesting to think that we also thought that, bacteria were ghosts. So who knows what we'll understand about consciousness in the future. We'll think we're a ton of dummies, though. That's one thing I'm certain of.
I want to kind of tie it back to what you really do specifically. And do you see yourself more as an educator or an entertainer?
I think more of an entertainer. I think that there are so many people who are great educators and who are actual scientists with real PhDs. And I think that their primary goal is to educate people. And I think for me, because I started out, I used to love theater and I love writing, and I had like a humor column in an alternative paper. And to me, if I can get someone to laugh or pay attention, like, that feels like, yes, I did it. Like, it feels like I used my brain and thought of something witty. And so I think that I'm also really interested in science, and I think it's really enriching to have context about the world around you. Like, I think that as someone who's had a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression, and I might have ADHD, I'm not sure, I haven't been diagnosed, but my boyfriend has it, and there's a lot of similarities. And I'm like, that could be. Someone once said like that my asides are very ADHD, and I was like, oh, did someone just diagnose me? So helpful. Like, but and on that note, I lose my train of thought. But yeah, I think that the more context you have for the stuff around you, the less maybe you'll ruminate on what's wrong with you. And so I think if you can get out of your own asshole and stop thinking like, oh, I'm such a piece of shit, and just be like, oh, check out that bird, like, you might just appreciate the world around you more if you understand it more. And I just think that having worked for newspapers and, my family are all journalists, like, I know how the attention economy works, and I know a little bit about how the stuff that bums us out goes to the top of the headlines, and the blood and the tears and those things that poke at our amygdalas and make us scared, we buy those newspapers, and those advertisers get our dollars. And a lot of what is really beautiful or weird or funny about science or nature, falls to the bottom. And so if I can take that stuff and make that the base of comedy and writing, then I can do both. But I think that a big part of what drives me is wanting to give people information that isn't at the expense of other people's suffering. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that's what we pay attention, or isn't about celebrity, or isn't made to make you feel worse about yourself, just by looking at like billionaires and lip implants and, people with 7 Maseratis and stuff. Like, I think that a lot of that tends to get addictive because we feel bad when we see it,
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, you mentioned the attention economy, and there's not enough of that. I think the framework or the marketing, if you will, of what makes people pay attention to a story or an idea is very well established in the world of economics and business and politics, and these things that are, yeah, they shape our lives, but ultimately, like, they are shaped by people's attention as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So many of the like purely academic pursuits that are also shaping our lives don't exist in that same framework, and are so often not communicated in that framework. It's very, very hard for the average person to just walk in and and get an idea of, you know, why they feel the way they do, or why some things are solid and some things aren't, or just, you know, any number of endless understanding the world around you questions.
And I think it's like what Jon Stewart did for politics, I want to try to do for science. You know, I think that there was a time when politics were really dry and people were like, it's not for me, so why would I get involved, or why would I be an activist, or why would I have an opinion, or whatever. And I think that, you know, the era of The Daily Show was, okay, we took this stuff that is crazy and it is so filled with gossip and conniving and money and power, and there's great stories here, and if we can make it accessible and make it funny and make it digestible, we can get people interested enough where they feel like they've been let in the door, and then they can start to get involved. And I think to do that for science is something that I've always wanted to do, is just to open the door and to take something that already has so much drama and so much humor and foibles and conniving and cannibalism and things that you can find all of that in science. You can find some of it, probably even the cannibalism in politics, but, you know, just being able to take stuff that's real and get people interested in it, instead of being so absorbed in maybe petty stuff that we're peddled all the time, you know?
You know, it's funny you mentioned Stewart, because that's who and what I was thinking of when I asked that educator versus entertainer question.
That's funny.
Because that was his whole line, right? It's like, I'm a comedian. He came from, he was a stand-up comic. And you know, he wasn't even the first host of that show. He took it over, right? He'd done other talk shows beforehand.
Yeah. I always forget that he took it over. Who had it? Craig Kilborn? No. Who had it first?
God, now I can't remember. I can't. Oh God, that's bad.
No.
It was only like 1 or 2 seasons though, I think.
Yeah.
So it was like a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But
I always forget.
There is this issue where he's like, I'm an entertainer, not a journalist, right? But at some point, that it's true, but it does start to fall apart, because it became a primary source of information.
Mm-hmm.
And in politics, there's a long legacy of that, right? Like that goes back to Will Rogers, who would do the same thing, but both of those men, they had like this very large and pronounced influence on people's understanding of world events, and ultimately probably on their decisions in regards to them.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of fucking responsibility.
Yeah, it is. And, you know,
do you feel that?
I don't feel that so much, because I think I'm lucky where I interview experts. And I also, you know, because my dad was a crime reporter, my sister was a crime reporter. And when I was a journalist at the LA Times, I was covering things like museum openings and science events and some book reviews and, you know, gallery stuff. And so I was a writer and a staff writer and a like very air quotes reporter. You know what I mean? I had to fact check press releases. Like it wasn't the same as being like, no one knew that this well was filled with poison or something. It was not that. But I think that in a way, there are some entertainers who are like journalists of their own life, you know? And I think that like a lot of stand-ups and a lot of writers use their own life as their material. And so I don't know, I think like with using science kind of as the material, I feel okay about relying on the experts that I interview and then going and finding more information and like fact checking that and trying to find peer-reviewed studies, because mostly just out of wanting to avoid the shame of being publicly so wrong. I mean, I'm really shame driven, let's be honest. I'm really like, I don't want anyone to be like, hey, you stupid bitch, you got that so wrong. And like that kilometers conversion to miles was way off. And like, you know, like cows are not invertebrates. Like, what the fuck? And so I just, for my own like embarrassment, will like triple check. So it takes me a long time to write episodes each week, and I'm like sweating up to the last minute because I'm like, I should check this, So I try to do a good job, but I don't get too many correction emails, and I know I've fucked up because I get much more than one correction. I'll have like, my inbox will be like, I'm not sure if you understood, but this is, and I was like, I know. 4 of you have told me in the last hour that I mispronounced this species name. So thank you very much. I got it.
You've worked on a bunch of projects. Is there one that stands out that's something that you were the most excited about, or that you're the most proud of in retrospect?
It's funny because ologies is that thing for me that it really, really was a risk that changed my life a lot. I mean, I had started volunteering at a science museum when I was already doing some TV stuff. I was doing cooking TV, but that was kind of just a fortuitous thing that came up, and my heart didn't feel like it was in it very much. Like I don't even like donuts, but I would be like, oh, these donuts are so good, and I was like, I'm a liar and a fake. And so when I started doing science TV, I really loved doing that, but it wasn't until I started working on ologies where I really could apply my real voice to stuff I really cared about. So it was like I could be bawdy and gross and whatever with cooking stuff, and then I had to be very like, hey kids, isn't this an interesting thing on science TV? But ologies really let me use my writing and my personality and use like my adult voice with science, which is what I always wanted to do. And so the fun thing about that is I don't have to get network notes from anybody. I don't have to shorten my episodes to 59 minutes and 59 seconds. Like I can do whatever I want. And that autonomy has really taught me a lot, that I can handle like a producer role. I can handle having more executive decisions in the things I create, because before that, I mean, I felt like I was always like, okay, yeah, whatever you guys say. Like, but it's made me feel, it's been really empowering to trust my own voice. And the funny thing about it is, like, I end up getting so many leads on other jobs and other opportunities because of ologies. And I was really afraid of putting my own voice out there and really being myself. I was afraid it would compromise my work in like kids science TV or whatever. I was afraid people would hear me talking about dicks a lot and be like, oh, get her, she's not coming on for a stint on Sesame Street this week. And I obviously have still not been invited on that, but instead I ended up getting a lot of leads where people were like, oh, we like your voice. We like what you're doing. And I didn't expect that at all. So it's been really empowering. I'm always just like, if anyone wants to make anything, just like be yourself, make the thing you care about the most, like take that risk. Cause I was precious with it for a really long time and was so afraid to mess up. But you really just have to just make what you want to make and use your voice. It's so much more rewarding to see something out in the world that's like really feels like you, like whatever, you can get a ton of likes on something that doesn't feel like completely you, but just having a small group of people dig what's really you feels so fulfilling. And then on top of that, I think that when those things are really organic and you're really into it and you're being real and vulnerable and it is what you're into, you end up being much more successful with that thing anyway, So yeah, I always just am like, figure out what gives you butterflies the most and then just make something along that line. I wish I would have done that earlier.
Speaking of earlier, are you where you envisioned yourself in life? When you were the little girl poking cow pies and algae with a stick, did she think that she was gonna grow up to be entertainer and science communicator and talk show host and everything else? Or
I always dreamed of that. I always dreamed, it's funny, I think I always actually loved comedy, and I loved stand-up comedy, and I loved watching it, but I kind of never really got up the nerve to do it. So I kind of feel like part of me is cheating by doing it by writing humorous stuff in a podcast instead of just going like straight for it. But I think that loving science and loving writing and entertainment, yeah, I think that I can't believe that stuff I get to do. I can't believe that someone like Bill Nye would want my opinion on things. Like I I've gotten to travel around the world. I've gotten to meet so many people. I've gotten to ask so many stupid questions, and I'm always working a little bit too hard because I'm so afraid that it's all going to go away. Because like I have been a waitress for minimum wage in my 30s, and like I have like paid rent in sticky cash, from like working behind a bar. And so I've had to make the choice between car insurance and going to the dentist. And so I'm so lucky to do what I do now and to get paid for it, that I'm just like, I'm constantly like just trying to stay where I'm at. I definitely haven't been like, well, I've made it, I can relax a little bit. I'm just like, it's so good here. What do I need to do to stay? So I'm still like always trying to prove myself.
I like to end all of these, as we're getting towards kind of the end of the program, I like to end all these with the same question, which I'm actually normal, as an aside, I do these, I end with the same thing every time. Normally, I feel like I kind of know what the answer is.
Okay.
With you, I'm not 100% sure. So
all right.
This is actually fun. But through your whole life and through your career specifically, what's the thing that you most want to convey to other people?
Oh, man. I think I want to convey that everyone is kind of like lovable or interesting. I know that doesn't track at all with science, but I think one thing that I want other people to get interested in others, and I think like doing ologies and asking people what really gets them excited about what they do, or when do they mess up on the job, or what do they hate about their job, what do they love about their job. I think when people walk away getting to know someone and getting to appreciate them, I feel like that's a big win for me. And so I think that like, I hope that people look at strangers and say, oh, I don't know what they're into. I don't know what they might be interested in. I don't know the stuff that they might know about succulents, or whatever. And so I think getting others to just appreciate each other, even though there's a lot of super shitty people out there, I think that even those shitty people probably have people that they're really nice to, and that those shitty people are probably doing shitty things out of like a lot of pain and fear. And so I guess just hoping that people kind of appreciate each other in ways that aren't so guarded. That sounds really naive, but that's just, if everyone could just be a little nicer to each other and more excited about each other, that would be dope. I don't know. I
don't think it's naive at all. I think it's very dope. Very dope.
I hope. I mean, that, and that we're all made of frogs. Who knows? You're made of frogs. Like, think of the things that you're made of. Do you ever think about that? What are you even? You know what I mean? Like, you have dinosaur bone juice in your car, and some of it's up your asshole right now. Like, what the fuck, man? Who knows? You don't know when someone watered those fajita peppers, where that water was before. That could have been goose pee. Now you're a goose. That's exciting.
So there's your next piece of merch. Alie Ward, be kind to each other. You're all made of frogs.
You're all made of frogs. You're goose pee. That's exciting. So I don't know. I guess I want people to just walk around like big dopey stoners all the time, but so nice to each other, Just like, whoa, man. That's fucking, whoa. That's what I'm into.
Well, Alie, thank you so much for coming on the show. I am never going to be able to look at waterfowl or amphibians without seeing a close cousin again. Maybe this is the year I go vegan.
Might be. Who knows? Me too. We'll see. We got nothing but time in quarantine. Tofu fajitas, man. Do it up.
There we go. All right. This is Alie Ward. Again, the podcast is Ologies, and 100 Humans, which we didn't even talk about, is on Netflix this year.
That's true. There's that also. So yeah, go watch that. Go listen to that. Thank you so much for having me. I love what you put into the world. I think it's very cool.
Thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely an honor. And I can't wait to see the millions of projects I'm sure you have coming down the pipeline, because that seems to be what you do.
I'll do my best to inform Arizona, and I'm going to say hi next time I'm out there.
Looking forward to it. Stay safe.
Okay, you too. Bye.